So last time I finished up milling everything, and now I want to move on to the joinery. So I want to make a template to lay out exactly the angles that my two legs cross that will not only determine the ends of the legs, but the angle of the half laps that I have to make. So I've cut out a piece of cardboard exactly to the outer footprint of my crossed legs and laid in cross lines and then laid in the 4-inch width of the legs and connected all the dots. Now I can lay a bevel right up against the bottom and I can use it to set the angle on the bottom of my legs. That's the first thing I want to do is cut those mitered angles. So I'll transfer that bevel and the knife line to my legs and I can begin to saw them out. I've been known to speak out against miter boxes. Not that I don't like them, in fact I own a couple of them, but they are pure luxury items, and really a bench hook and a saw is all you need to make any number of miter cuts. Because generally once the cut is made, you come and clean it up with a plane anyway. So let me show you my technique for making angled cuts or even square cuts with just a bench hook. Interestingly enough, I'm using a miter box saw made by Bad Axe Toolworks. First thing I want to do is set the angle across the face. So I'll start sawing on the corner nearest me, working mostly across the face and not paying too much attention to the vertical cut. I'm going to draw my curve across to about the middle point and then switch to the opposite corner and work backwards, drawing that curve back until it meets the first line that I created. Now I can focus on connecting them, making sure they're all in the same line, and deepening that curve across the face. With that set, I can relax a little bit and pick up my pace and focus on just dropping the cut down the vertical line. Notice how my arm is perfectly in line with the saw here. Technique is key in making this cut. As I progress halfway, I'm continually checking to make sure I'm on my vertical line to ensure that I've got not only across the face, but in that plumb aspect as well. Now look at my stance. Notice how wide it is? My body is locked in place and out of the way of my arm. My elbow can move freely and let the saw do its job. And just finish up the cut. And ideally, you've got it right on your angle and plumb. So you've got just a little bit of cleanup to do with the plane. Now the knife line that I sunk all the way around it is really helpful here because I can check that line and see how close or how far away I am and how much I have to remove. You can see I was a little high on the side nearest to me, so I'm focusing most of my planing on that side first to drop it down into a nice square aspect. I'll finish up the cut, get the entire thing right on the angle and perfectly plumb. Now I can line that up on my template on the back edge there where that angle cut is, and I can come around with a pencil and trace and get the exact length of the leg. Repeat all of that. Same technique here to cut this leg exactly to the appropriate length. And then I'll go ahead and clean it up with a plane again. If you're right on your cut line, it really shouldn't take long to clean this up with a plane. Now I'm going to use a holdfast and essentially lock the first leg down on top of another one, and use that leg as a fence to guide my saw and to cut the other legs exactly to the same length. And you can repeat this, well, 2 more times. So you've got 4 legs with the angle set, checked with a bevel gauge, and all exactly the same length. Just remember, if you're a little off, that's what the plane's for, and you can correct it with the bevel there. Now I'm going to grab another bevel and set it to the angle of the intersection. I'm going to focus on cutting my half laps. I'll lay the finished leg in place and mark the locations of the half laps. You can start to see how important this template is. I continually will reference it throughout the joinery phase. I'll just knife my line across for my half laps. Now I'm going to create a first-class saw cut here with the chisel. Just create that little V-notch that will guide my saw as I begin to make these half lap cuts. Now the same technique I used for the miter cuts can be done here. You can start on the near side and work across, or you can start on the far side and draw it back towards you. I'm focusing on getting that cut square across the face. Then I'll begin to tilt the handle down a little bit and work down the vertical face, just on the line near me. On this other side of the cut, it's the same technique. You just have to repeat this kind of over and over and over again. As long as you stay right on your lines, you won't have that much cleanup work to do later. Now I could chop all this out, but you'll find it's so much easier if you create a series of relief cuts in the middle. These are often called Morton cuts, and I'm putting quite a few of these in here. I've gone back to my more aggressive miter box saw here just to plow through this as quick as possible. And now when I chisel, you can see the wood comes away real freely. If I hadn't put these Morton cuts in, I'd have a lot more risk of chip out, and I'd have to work a lot harder and pound a lot harder on the chisel to get this to pop out like that. You can work all the way across if you want, but it's good to stay away from your baseline because it may chip out a little and you don't want it to dive below your baseline on the far side. I'm going to come back with a paring chisel and just kind of clean this up and start to level it out. This is a step that may not be necessary. If you have a nice wide and long paring chisel with good leverage, this is kind of a good intermediary step. I could even take this to the finish stage, but I'm going to grab my router plane instead. Since I have to make essentially 4 of these for half laps on 2 sets of legs, the repeatability of the router plane, the fact that I can set a depth stop, is really, really useful here. Now I'll fit this together and it should be a pretty tight fit. I'm just setting it in place on the other leg, and now if I lock it in place with the hold fast, I can now transfer the location of the half lap to the other leg. And I'll use my knife for that. Now you can bring it down the vertical faces. It's not as important here because you can come back with a square and do that later. Now we're just going to repeat all this all over again. Sawing, chopping, and then coming back with a router plane. Once you've got that fit, you should be able to just tap it together. A nice friction fit's what I'm looking for here. Very good. Stand it up and do that again for the other legs. Now I want to check my dimensions. I was shooting for 30 inches from the top here, and I'm going to grab my top stretcher and begin to lay things out. The relation of my top stretcher to my legs as I scribe this line is not quite correct. We'll get into that a little bit more later. I'm creating a bridle joint on the end of this rail, and I'm dealing with pretty beefy stock, so I've got a lot of room to create a pretty beefy tenon. So as I'm setting my gauge, I'm trying to figure out exactly how wide I want to make it. And before you get too carried away, you want to make your life easy and set the width of the tenon equivalent to a chisel that you might have. When I'm chopping out mortises, I'll always set it to match the width of my mortise chisel. Well, I don't have mortise chisels that are 1 inch wide. I think they're just kind of impractical, and 1 inch seems like a good amount to deal with here because I've got 2 inch thick stock, so I can have a really beefy tenon. So what I'm going to do is just bring my chisel to bear, set the width of the tenon that way, and then once I cut the female part of this bridle joint, I'll have a chisel that perfectly matches the width, and I'll be able to get a perfect inner wall on that bridle joint. Stop the presses and slow down. Looks like I made a little mistake here. Hopefully that's my big mistake for this project and get it out of the way when it's not that big of a deal. I cut this stretcher to length based upon the dimension from the top of the leg to the other top of the leg, which is 30 inches. So I cut this 31 inches thinking I'd have a little bit extra that I could trim flush, stupidly forgetting about the angle. This angle here, as the stretcher drops down in the bridle, this becomes shorter. So if you look, there's a little bit protruding down here, and you can see that I had it perfectly long enough in order to match the bottom of this joint, but I needed a little bit extra in order to flesh the whole thing out. Frankly, it's not a big deal because this is going right underneath the tabletop and it's really not even going to be seen. So rather than having kind of a fragile sharp point here, what I'm going to do is just cut it off, observing the same angle that I've been using all along. I can just come in here and cut that off like that. I've already done it on this piece. So now this will just be a vertical section, and it will maybe even provide a little bit more room when a person comes in and sits on the long edge of the table. I wish that I had caught this before, because this bridal joint, in removing the material on the female part of the joint, was a lot harder because of this extreme angle. Now with this essentially squared off, I've got a 90-degree face to my line that'll make it real easy to pop out the waist on the female part of the bridal. So it's time to saw it out. And this is the same technique we've been talking about all along. I'm gonna work across the top, and then I'm gonna start working down the face towards me. Then I'll switch to the other side and repeat that so that my lines meet in the middle. When I've got it clamped upright like this, I can actually move my body around to the other side and saw without moving the workpiece. Then I'm gonna come back and make those Morton cuts in the middle. And you see I went heavy duty with a regular hand saw here to cut through this quickly. Now I'm just gonna start chopping it out. Something's a little wrong here though. I think I'll take it out of the vise. I'm spilling energy as it shifts. When I put it on the bench top, now you can see what having solid, firm bench foundation under your chopping can do for you. You're just gonna work down. This is one of those areas where you probably wanna have some safety glasses on. Look at those chips flying everywhere, bouncing off the lens. I just wanna work my way back to my baseline here, but some of this grain can be really difficult to deal with. And, you know, I had to switch around chisels a couple of times, and in one instance, I had such difficult grain, I switched over to a 3/16 chisel and just started removing each one of these little slivers between Morton cuts. It was the only way I could really make it work. Now, finally, I just want to match the baseline, and I can see the line I scribed on my edge, and I just want to sight down the edge with my chisel and match that. And here's the fit. It slides in a nice friction fit. I'm gonna need probably a little bit of tapping just to seat it. But if you look, even when it's seated, it doesn't come perfectly flush up top. And I did this on purpose so I would have a little adjustment room later when it comes to actually setting the top in place and getting it nice and level. Just a little insurance factor. So now I wanna go ahead and glue it up. And you know, this glue up is real simple. With nice tight joinery, there's not a whole lot of clamps real needed. I just paint on the hide glue, use a couple of clamps across the lap joint, and then slide in the bridle on top. Apply a clamp between all that, and I just need to repeat that one more time for the other set of legs.